we're going to make this fun for you. Everyone's like cringing, and it'll be painless, I promise. Everyone's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. We're going to run through a few slides. We'll make it quick, just an overview. And then we are going to run through a few scenarios, and so you guys can work together. We're going to put the scenarios up, but it's everyday things that you're probably already dealing with. So hopefully it'll be helpful for you guys to run ideas. The idea is that you will talk to each other, kind of discuss. We're not going to have all the answers for you, and just sort of hear from some of you guys that have come up against some of these scenarios and what you've done. So we're going to start our slides, and I'm Claire, and this is Nikki, by the way.
Hello.
Cool. So we always hear about best practices. You've heard about open adoptions. But what does that actually mean? So you guys have heard a lot this weekend about eliminating barriers. So not making it hard for people to help you, either people to help foster or people to help adopt. And truly at APA, for instance, Austin Pets Alive, our motto, it's on our shirts and it's on all of our gear, but helping people help pets. That's really what our mission is. We all got our jobs and we love what we do because we love animals, but we need to help people help the animals that we love so much. So really rethinking our role as counselors and advocates and representatives of our organizations, that we're not there to judge people, we're not there to be interrogating people, but every visitor, I love this quote, should walk in feeling respected and then walk out more educated and hopefully with a pet to love. We also, have you ever heard of like the black cat fears and the, what if I don't call their landlord, they're just gonna return, all of these fears out there. Or if someone 10 years ago had a bad experience and somehow it's built in your adoption policy. So getting rid of some of our biases, our unsubstantiated fears, and we're using data and facts. And the next slide, I'm going to go over some of the studies that have been done to sort of debunk a lot of these myths that are out there. And then we're approaching adoptions from a place of yes. Our goal, again, is not to interrogate. We're not a police officer trying to weed out the bad people. We're trying to get to yes. And there are going to be barriers to adoption. There's going to be those red flags and things that come up. But our goal is to educate and to not be so judgmental, because the minute you're judgmental, the minute you're rude, you've shut that door on a possible opportunity to educate. It also doesn't mean that we say yes to every single adoption, that we don't have conversations and we're willy-nilly just sending dogs and cats out the door. The goal is really to get to know people through conversation and less through a pass-fail method of adoption. So we're relying on our conversations and not so much the application. I would also encourage you to just change your language. So it's not an application anymore. You can call it an adoption survey or a questionnaire to make it less so daunting and less a pass-fail scenario. So the studies, we have all these well what ifs and all these sort of hypothetical fears out there, and you're thinking about that one return that happened and maybe basing an entire policy off of that one bad situation. But kind of scan out, let's look at the big picture, and luckily we don't have a ton of research in our field because we're constantly changing and trying to innovate. But several years ago, these studies have been out there, but we haven't caught up. We're in old school practices. So one of the things that's really common is landlords, right? Calling landlords. We think that that's going to increase our pet retention and people won't return. What about breed restrictions? What if they can't have a large breed dog? Getting rid of landlord checks. That is the best practice. We have had many shelters, even since the study came out, that have eliminated landlord checks, and they have not seen an increase in returns, but organizations have doubled their adoptions by not doing that check. We educate versus having to police. Having a blanket policy for pets is adopted as gifts. We hear that a lot. We don't do that. Well, our organization wouldn't do that. So it doesn't mean that any 17-year-old can come in and is like, my mom wants a dog, that you just give them a dog. That's not what that means. It just means being case by case and being open to different scenarios. 2013, ASPCA did a study on this, pets that were adopted as gifts and those that weren't, and they found no difference in pet attachment level or if they were just returned. So that myth that we've been kind of hearing this weekend too, of well, what about the adoptions after the holidays? It's actually not a thing, and we're not seeing it in our numbers. So I would encourage you to run your data too, debunk all of these myths. Waived adoption fees, so that means that, oh, they're just gonna get returned, people don't value their pet. Try to get personal with that. Do you value your dog or cat, or does your family member value them less if they didn't pay an adoption fee? And the answer is no, and that's what the national studies are also showing us. And this was back in 2011. we're 2020, we can do this, we're still push forward. But with that study, when they looked at people that paid a fee and those that didn't, they saw no difference in attachment level or pet retention rate or post-adoption lifestyle. So truly, when we are talking about adoptions and talking about foster placements, we have to ask ourselves, and this really hit home for me when I started asking my questions when I was calling landlords, and I felt like as a counselor, it was my job to police people. But was it just there for me as a person to feel better, or was it truly in the best interest of that dog and cat? So is it just giving me like the ability to sleep at night knowing I've done all these sort of arbitrary checks that aren't actually resulting in anything, or is it in the best interest of getting that dog and cat in a home? So. Hand it over to Nikki real quick.
So I've been doing this for a long time, and when I started in this field, I was doing adoptions at the time when we had a Rolodex. If those of you old enough to know what a paper Rolodex is, we had a Rolodex that had every single landlord and apartment complex and their pet policy and their deposit. And when people would put their address and where they lived, we would go through and say, oh yeah, nope, this dog is 35 pounds, your limit's 30. Clearly your apartment complex will know the 5-pound difference, so we're gonna have to deny this adoption. And so then I started doing research and reading more and more and learning more about these studies, and what I found was, yeah, these policies make us feel better, but it is not in the best interest of the pets. If you are denying an adoption in your community, there's a very high potential that another pet in your community will die. And so is a landlord check really worth another pet in your community dying? So you might be a no-kill facility, but I bet your animal control facility has animals at risk of dying. And if you are taking animals from your animal control facility and you're denying adoptions, you're denying a space at your shelter where they could be safe. So I want you to think about that when you're denying adoptions, or even just setting up barriers to adoptions. It doesn't have to be denials. It could just be making it really hard for people to adopt. And so when I started going down this path of wanting to do open adoptions, there was a ton of resistance. I mean, the volunteers revolted, half the staff revolted, and they hid the Rolodex from me, and then when I wasn't looking, they were like going in corners and digging through and making secret phone calls, and it was terrible. And so what we did was we did a couple different things to get people to buy in. And so if you look at getting buy-in from people, you have to look at it many different ways, because not everything speaks to everyone. So for some people, we called it a pilot program. So then people felt safe. Okay, it's just a pilot program. If it doesn't work, no big deal. We'll keep track of the data. We'll make sure that nothing bad happens to the animals. And if it doesn't work, it's just a pilot program so we can go back. But then in looking at the bigger picture too, we really need to engage people's hearts, hands, and minds. And each one of these, I'm not going to read them to you because we don't have time today, but I can send them to you. Our contact information will be at the end of this. When you speak to someone's heart, for some people, that's all you need to do is speak to their heart, get to where it's going to kick them in the heart, and that's how you can get their buy-in. Now, this might take some individual conversations or small groups, but it's worth it. It's worth it when you get people behind you making a big change in your organization. If you look at the hands, look at all of the places that are doing this and support it. I mean, look at these agencies. American Pets Alive, Best Friends, Maddie's, the ASPCA, all the studies that Claire showed you, those were done with statistical significance with a large population sample. This wasn't just a tiny little town that they did adoptions in. They did it across the country. And so it's really good data to have. And for some people, seeing other people doing it, seeing the work done a certain way is what they need to buy in. And then look, we can appeal to people's minds as well. So this is an older study from 2012, but if we say that there are 144 million pets on average in the United States, only 6 to 8 million of them come to the shelter to adopt. That's 130 some million. It's really too late in the day for me to do math, but it's 130 something, I think, million that made it into homes without our barriers or adoption checks or landlord checks or vet checks or any of those things. So who are we to say that we really know better than all of these other pets that are living happily and healthy in their adoptive homes? For those of you, if anybody was in Denise Dicer and Tawny Hammond's presentation yesterday, Denise is my boss, and we both put this into our presentations. Neither one of us saw the others beforehand, but this is how important it is to us. We use the 3 guides to decision making at the Jacksonville Humane Society all across every department. But when asked recently, how do we make sure that we know that we're making the right decision when perhaps making an adoption that we're not exactly sure about, and maybe we have a little bit of, I'm a little bit nervous about that one, what do I do? We say, refer back to your 3 guides to decision making. So will it produce goodwill with the individual and with the community? So if you're denying an adoption or putting up roadblocks, what that does is that it sends a negative message to that family or that adopter. And not only do they have a negative feeling about your agency, but they go home and tell everybody else. So if you can figure out a way to communicate that maybe this isn't the best match or you have some other ideas for them, that's a much better way to go about fostering that good feeling in the community with your organization than just flat out no and judging people and making them feel embarrassed or feeling like they're on trial. I recently adopted a dog from, not the Jacksonville Humane Society, but from a rural shelter. And my adoption application was 8 pages long. And my family literally came up to me during it and said, are we buying a house or are we getting a dog? And I said, I'm not really sure. I think we're getting a dog, but I don't know. This looks like mortgage paperwork to me. So, and had I not known, that application might have been intimidating enough for me to turn and walk out the door. And that's a really high kill shelter that he was at. So we don't want to foster that kind of environment. The next guide to decision making is it in the best interest of the animal's health and well-being? So if your barrier or roadblock or denial leads to an animal dying, certainly that is not in the best interest of any of the animals. But also, if it leads to a longer length of stay, I think that we can all agree that even the best shelter in the country, in the world, is not anywhere that we think dogs and cats should be living. We think that they should be in homes, they should be happy, they shouldn't be living in a shelter environment. And so that, of course, is another example of how that's not in the best interest of the pet. And then for us, and this will vary by community, we try to save every adoptable animal in our community. And so we really try as a community between us at the Jacksonville Humane Society and Animal Control, we really strive to stay over that 90% save rate. And if my decisions are causing death at Animal Control, then that's not focused on our no-kill mission. And so those are all things that we use. We use these decision-making guides even when we are deciding whether or not to give a refund to someone. When we're deciding whether or not to let somebody walk in for an appointment that they claim that they made if they didn't. So these are different things that we use across the board, but this is a really good way to help those people that are on the fence about whether or not they're making good decisions about open adoptions, because it is scary to go from that place where you feel like you have a lot of control and you're worried about the pets and you're looking out for their best interests, but you have to let go of that. This is a really good way for you to kind of guide you along making those decisions. So does anybody have any questions before we start the next part of the workshop? Because this is a workshop, not a presentation. So you guys get to get involved now. Is there any questions? Okay, well, you're very quiet.
Yeah.
So I'd like to break the room up into 4 sections. So wherever it's a tight room, so if you can kind of divide yourselves into geographically where you're close to each other. So maybe the back 2 rows, maybe a couple of the back tables, and a few of the front ones here. And so we'll start at the front of the room will be 1, scenario 2, 3, and 4 all the way to the back. What we're gonna want you to do is take whatever scenario you're assigned, talk about it as a group, let us know your decision. Somebody gets to be the spokesperson and you'll present to the group afterwards. Now we don't have much time, so we're gonna only give this about 5 minutes, and we want you to be honest. And let us know what you think. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the back.
So yeah, scenario 1 right here. Elderly couple has decided to adopt 2-week-old puppies or kittens. Can you guys see 4?
Can everybody see their scenario? I think they can. Yes, if you can work together.
Here, we'll try to separate them. So maybe like spokesperson. You guys ready? Coming back in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, group 1, are you ready?
We're split because you got 2 scenarios.
Oh, you have a different answer for different species.
Well, not that. call me elderly. I'm gonna call 80 years old, 85-year-old elderly.
Well,
Two of the species.
well, I think that is going to vary because we have adoption counselors that are 21 to 81. So,
So like, I'm gonna answer, depending on the person standing in front of me, I'm gonna answer,
so I guess
Give them a mic too, I guess.
as an
I'm not denying anything, I'm just
Okay.
saying there's a lot wrapped up in
Okay.
one scenario.
well, in general,
In general, we would have a conversation about, at least what I was hearing, was can you handle the activity and care level and poop?
so the answer to in case you can't hear, the answer to number one is they would have a conversation if you can handle the activity,
The energy.
the energy, and the poop.
The poop.
So those are very important questions to ask.
On the dog side, I personally really want to talk to them about what can happen when litter mates, if it's two litter mates, when they decide they hate each other. Because we've been doing this for 10 years old, and the ones where we've done pairs, we've had more often than not. It's like sibling relationships. When they hate each other, it's ugly.
Right.
And they just need to be aware, and it's harder to train puppets.
It is hard.
Pairs.
Yes.
I would also suggest a lot of, just aftercare. So like a follow-up and, basically ask them how things are going because they may not have realized how much they've bitten off.
So
And you would say, how can I help you?
yeah, so but the other suggestion was that they would do a lot of follow-up with this particular adoption, which I think is a great point. We use the Maddie's post-adoption follow-up application, which is great. It does all of the work for you and just flags individual responses that are concerning. And then we let adoption counselors that have done adoptions that they feel not sure about, we let them they keep track and we let them do their own follow-ups just to make sure. The other thing I would suggest in this scenario is you could offer the couple a sleepover. Let them try it without actually adopting and see if it's too much or if it's something that they're interested in. Did anybody in the group one say no? Okay, good.
Because the whole goal of this whole conference, what I'm hearing is, let's not say no.
Exactly.
So.
Great. Well, great job. All right, number two. I worked with a girl who would not adopt dogs to people who smoked, as if that had some bearing on their ability to care for their pets. But that was her bias, and she had a really hard time, and so she would just have to hand over those adoptions to someone else. And so we all have biases, and we need to acknowledge those when going through these different things.
And
Okay.
real quick, I hear a lot of like, well, we're in a college town, or we have a lot of people that are renting. If you guys have dealt with the traffic in Austin, you know that this is the fastest growing city. The cost of living here is kind of crazy. I'm not doing like don't move to Austin campaign, but it's kind of crazy. Everyone has roommates and landlords, and most people are renting because of the cost of living. So the way we've kind of tackled that, of course, we don't want dogs coming back that we could avoid, but just putting the education, being like, hey, are you aware that there's breed restrictions? We're not calling and like outing somebody and calling their landlord. A, we don't have time for that. B, we could be doing more adoptions while we're doing all these secret checks. But B, it puts people on the defensive. Even if they're like smiling and they're like, this is great. Internally, it's very uncomfortable. So thinking about the adoption experience from their shoes and from their perspective. So put the education on them, grown-ass adults, yet again. Let them make the responsibility. You're there to educate and inform, and you're there if things don't go right, and you're there to help them through that. So think of it just a different perspective. We're not there to police people. And it will be okay, I promise.
All right. I think a lot of people think that growing up, they thought that, well, every cat that I had as a kid was declawed, so I have to declaw my cat. They think that that's what is supposed to happen. They have no idea what that actually means or any of the potential consequences or the actual suffering that could happen from it. So I think that's a really good answer. Yeah. And you can have a conversation, I think, and get to the bottom of some of the answers to questions that look different than they look on paper. Some people answer things on paper, and without the discussion, they don't really know what is intended. And I have an example of that is in my previous shelter, I had to be notified every time somebody wanted to deny an adoption, and they wanted to deny this couple that wanted an outside dog. Well, that's what they put on their application. And so I went to talk to them. Well, they are a retired couple on a 3-acre fenced-in farm, and they wanted an outside dog to work in the garden with them all day long, but the dog would come inside at night and they would house train and crate train and do all of these things. But to them, outside dog meant that the dog would spend time outside with them when they were doing things outside. So just looking at what they put on their piece of paper is a completely different answer than what they were really planning for that dog. And so we have actually done away with any paper applications or surveys or anything. Everything that we do is just a discussion. We don't put anything in writing anymore because it's too confusing. Does anybody have any questions or comments, scenarios that they want help with? Volunteers or staff that they are worried about getting buy-in?
And I think with this, like it seems really cut and dry. Like, well, the answer is always yes, but not always. And like with that situation, that was education or the declaw. Like, you know, at APA, we if someone is so adamant that they're going to do it, we're not going to adopt out a cat that has their claws. So we're going to find one that doesn't, whether it's in foster care, we put them on the wait list. So it doesn't mean that this blanket yes, but I would just challenge you guys as you go home is thinking about, you know, we're doing this work because we want the best. We're trying to do the best for the dogs and cats in our care, especially the ones that have come in from a neglect situation. But just getting over that perception of the perfect home, the pool and the help and the $1 million mansion home and the ranch with no other pets and no kids, and thinking about what's good. So we've really had to challenge ourselves here in Austin. We're having more and more dogs with behavior challenges. And so it's like, what is good? What's the minimal amount that's going to keep this dog safe and they're going to get their needs met and they're going to be loved? But at the end of the day, the dog or cat doesn't care if he's living in a mobile home or in not the fanciest of, you know, apartments or houses. It's just that they're getting their needs met and they're loved. But getting rid of this perception of the perfect home, I would just challenge you all on that. So
the other thing is I would challenge everybody as well to stop being afraid of returns. Returns aren't necessarily a bad thing. Returns give us information. They provide us with information for the next adopters. I would think it's safe to say we're all big supporters of foster care. The dogs and cats don't know the difference between going to foster care and getting returned. And we don't think that the foster care bringing back their pet is a terrible thing, but somehow people hold on to that belief that a return is a bad thing. And I don't think it is. I think that it gives us a lot more information, and I think it can be really helpful to place the next pet. And then it also is really helpful to the adopters themselves, because if they had small kids and they know that a dog did well with small kids before, that's a helpful decision maker.
One thing too, before you guys leave, we do have a handout here, so feel free to grab it. It's you might be able to just insert logo here, an adoption program philosophy, and also it's a list of all the studies that have been done, as well as the 3 guides to decision making. If you guys have closed foster Facebook groups where your internal fosters or your volunteers are there, I would urge you to just start educating them. So start putting up, like having a conversation happen. That's how people are going to learn to work through things. So post the study and be like, what do you guys think about this? At least A, they've seen it, they know what the research is, but B, then you can hash out what the real fears are. So I would encourage you to do that. Just get people talking. It's really hard when we're asking our staff or volunteers or fosters to embrace open adoptions, but they don't know what's happening on a national level on it. So education.
And then if you guys have any specific questions or want examples of training materials or anything like that, you can email either one of us or both of us, and we're happy to provide you anything that you might need. Well, thank you guys all for coming to the last session of the day.